Alright, welcome back to Age of Gladiators. This is my second time recording this because OBS crashed and the window popped up behind the game screen. So I just got done wasting an hour of my life. Haha. Yeah, so to start off, the gladiators, whenever they're fatigued, it negatively impacts their stats. So if you go to level up a gladiator when they're fatigued, you have no idea what their base stats are. You have no idea what their strengths really look like whenever they're fully rested and ready and fit for combat. But you can drop them fatigued, so it's kind of whatever. But yeah, fatigue will actually influence different stats, different amounts. So if you look at Octalia here, she currently has reflexes 9 and dexterity 69. But if we rest the 5 days, something like that, she is now back up to 10 reflexes and 69 dex. So the dex didn't actually change from the fatigue, but the reflexes was down to 9. You could go back and look to see what all exactly changed, but she wasn't super fatigued, so it wasn't that massive of a stat drop. But yeah, so real quick before I go into leveling and everything and character builds and all that stuff, the perks, I have won 23 battles. My first perk that I picked immediately was Gladiators Retired, turned off because, again, I didn't want anyone to retire before I did this episode. So knocked that out, but I have 23 wins, which means I can pick another perk. This is not much complexity or depth that's added to the game, and if you turn off perks, it just gives you some of the stuff automatically and just whatever. It's hard to tell what the game exactly was balanced around because the game's not incredibly well balanced, but we'll see. We'll see if the remake makes this more compelling. But I kind of went over it yesterday, but I'll just quickly hit it again. Opportunities is just stuff that pops up that could potentially happen. I only had one pop up in the time that I spent leveling stuff up and getting ready to do this episode, and it was a chance to steal a gladiator from a different stable, which most of their gladiators are bad anyway, so I didn't really care if it succeeded or not, so I didn't put any of my gladiators to work on it, so I had a just base 30% chance to succeed, but if it failed, all I lost was the 30,000 currency that I put towards it, and I didn't risk any gladiators on my team getting injured, fatigued, or killed or anything. So, yeah. That's one way to spend perk points. Starting level, I feel like is bad. Not having the ability to spend the stat points the way... Actually, wait. No, that's right. It does let you distribute the stat points and the expertise points as you'd like. But if you get a project gladiator, for example, it delays the purchase of... I'll get to it in a second. There's a stat, or there's an expertise point that you can pick to give you additional stat points for the rest of the character's career, and it basically negates the amount of, like, if you put 5, if you get this to the point where you start at level 5 or whatever, and you want to put those points there, it effectively costs you quick math, I think like 14, 15 stat points. But like I said, I'll talk about that in a minute when I get to the expertise points. But it's not necessarily good or bad. It just, it skips the sitting around in the stable training portion of hiring a new gladiator. Health bonus, always good. As you level up, this makes the gladiators you start with objectively worse than the gladiators you get once this is full. Because as you saw, I was hiring gladiators that had 500 health. This is almost a 50% increase. That's pretty significant. Fatigue reduction, especially good if you're playing the doctor or whatever that I started as. So you don't get sick and your injury time's reduced. And if you have half fatigue, that means you just have a small stable of gladiators that's always ready. But alternatively, if you have a large stable of gladiators, this is less significant, because you can always drop, unfatigued gladiators, but it's helpful. Morale loss removal on betting on enemies. If you never bet on enemies, then it doesn't come up. Purse sharing gets you a little bit more money per fight, basically. So it's very akin to the purse amount bonus and betting pool bonus. So It's whatever. Honestly, those two work kind of better, at least later in the game. Because, yeah, increasing the purse amount by 20%, if you then have the option to not share any purse or give them 20% of the purse to keep their morale good or increase their morale, it's just, this is objectively better. And the betting pool, being able to bet more on the gladiators is, again, pretty good compared to just having the option. It makes it so that there's no longer any reason to ever pay your gladiators anything. So, yeah. And then reputation boost. Reputation helps you progress in the game and blah, 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 blah. Better weapons. The weapons in the shop have higher damage. Always good. Durable equipment. Decay reduction means that you can use the same equipment for longer before you have to replace it. Just kind of whatever. But yeah, so those are the perks, and as you can see, they're not super special, they're not super interesting, they're just kind of generalized buffs, improvements. So, let's look real quick at leveling up a character. Let's look at Nerva here. So, one thing to note is when they're unfatigued, unsick, uninjured, any stat they have that is odd, or not any stat, it's specifically agility, reflexes, and dexterity. If it's odd, unless behind the scenes it considers partial percentages, you just objectively get most effect, or the best effect from having the numbers be even, because it bumps it up to the next percentage. I don't know if they're using floats or if they're using integers, but if they're using integers, then that means that having an odd number is just a waste of a stat point, unless they're fatigued and it drops that stat by 1 point. Intelligence, never really worth putting points into, because again, all it influences is the speed with which they level, and if you have a character leveling really fast, they get to max level faster, and once they get to max level, they no longer progress, and intelligence does absolutely nothing. So, yeah. Strength is 1 damage per point. So, this Pugio is effectively boosting his strength by 114. Which, when your opponents largely have like 300, 400, 500 health, an extra point of strength doesn't do much. Stamina is actually quite important, and it determines how many times they can swing, how much they can block and dodge, and whatnot. And it's important no matter what kind of build you go with. Dexterity, I always like to get to 60 just because I feel like a 30% hit chance is good. After that, if I'm going a defensive build, that's basically where I leave it. If I'm going glass cannon, obviously maxing it. Getting to the 150 gets you 75% hit chance. So glass cannon, the idea is kill your opponent faster than they can hit you. So just maxing out dexterity and maxing out strength and stamina so that you just swing, 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 and hopefully kill them very quickly. Then a tankier builds like agility, reflexes, have dexterity somewhere where they will hit you, like sometimes, and then have enough health pool to soak the damage that comes in. And honestly, he's got pretty good defensive stats, so I think I would actually bump his stamina up to 40, give him a little bit more health, and build him as a tankier build. So, the builds. Let's go ahead and jump in here. So, we'll start with this little block here, and then work our way around. Flare. Flare is explicitly there to make losing potentially less bad. So, the 3 outcomes that a gladiator can have when you drop them into a fight is they win, they get killed during the match, i.e. they get stabbed in the heart and just collapse and they lose and you lose them, or they lose and the audience decides whether the winner executes them or not. Flare only impacts that last potential action, or the last potential option. And you start off with a base 20% chance for them to be spared in the event that they lose and don't get killed in the process of losing. And each point of flare increases that by 10% up to a maximum of 90%. So, instead of using the expertise points to lose less, which you still lose, you still don't get paid when you lose. And if you bet on your gladiator, you still lose that money. So it doesn't even negate the, loss at all. It just means that if they lost, you're less likely to have them die. So I've always felt like it was kind of just bad. Because if you put those points towards literally anything else, except for Killer Instinct, we'll get to that in a second. If you put those points towards literally anything else, you reduce the odds of getting to the point where where Flair actually comes up. And again, if they lose, and they get killed in the process of the fight, which you can see with Killer Instinct, is a base 25% chance that the opponent will just outright kill them during the fight. So they have a 75% chance of not already being dead before Flare triggers. And then if you dump 7 points into that, which is 7 levels worth, that only brings it up to a 90% chance to survive. So 75% chance to be killed, assuming the enemy gladiator doesn't have any Killer Instinct points, and then 10% chance to survive if you've dumped 7 levels worth of points into it. Just bad. Just bad. Fast learner. Worth noting, max level for any gladiator is 30, so you will get 29 expertise points over the course of the gladiator's career, assuming they survive to max level. Spending 7 of them, which is a quarter of the points they will ever get, just to maybe not die if you lose. Probably not ideal. Fast learner. If you get it early, it can actually add up to a lot. Again, there are 29 levels that you will gain over the course of progressing from level 1 to max level. So if you take Fast Learner at level 2, the first chance you get, that's an additional 28 points over the course of the Gladiator's career, which is 14% dodge, block, or hit chance. And then level 3 would be, 27, etc., etc. So the only time you would ever want to take Fast Learner is early on, and obviously on a more project-oriented gladiator rather than one you're going to be dropping actively into dangerous fights immediately, because it gives very minimal immediate returns. And by immediate, I mean the following level and beyond. But it's an interesting choice, specifically because it does have that trade-off of they're a little bit weaker for this level to be a little bit stronger from the final level on, resulting in them being a considerable amount stronger at max level. Because if you put 5 points into that, it doubles the amount of skill points they get per level, starting on level 7. So it can be a very significant increase to the gladiator's strength. But obviously, if you take it at level 30, it does absolutely nothing. So that's an interesting and compelling choice to make while building a character. And then Killer Instinct is kind of just bad. So you have a base 25% chance for your gladiator to just kill their opponent if they win. And specifically, if they win. You still have to knock them down to 0 health and win the fight. And there's a 25% chance that they just die before the audience gets to vote on whether they survive or not. This actively hinders you. Because, for one, that means that there's no chance, if it succeeds, there's no chance of the opponent dropping that same gladiator in a future battle injured that would then let you kill them more easily or win more easily, giving you a better payout for very low risk, giving you experience for very low risk. It also causes your opponent to go bankrupt faster, which means you progress through the opponents and through the cities to higher level, higher rated opponents, which let me just flip over real quick to the bosses. I already took Priscus out, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but you can see Longus here is average fighter level 5, while Ducius is average level 6. His gladiators are generally higher level and often better. When you get to the next city, their starting gladiators by default are much higher level. I think they're starting at average 10-ish, And then Brunzium is like average like 15-ish. And then Rome is like average 20 plus whenever you first get there. So like killing the enemy gladiators faster is actually actively more dangerous than letting your gladiators level more before finishing them off. So the killer instinct is actually bad. Like just it hinders you up until the very end of the game when you're trying to clear Rome out to win the game. But I feel like having something more compelling that would make the end game more fun instead of just getting through it faster would be a better option. Like, for example, just throwing one out off the top of my head. If Killer Instinct instead gave any given hit a % chance to kill the gladiator during the match. If it started at, say, 0%, and each point gave you just throwing a number out, obviously it would need to be balanced and tweaked and monitored closely so it didn't just become too strong. But if it gave you a 1% chance when your gladiator landed a hit for that hit to instantly kill the enemy and end the fight, this would be so interesting to put on a tankier gladiator or a gladiator that is pretty weak, that has a pretty high chance of just losing and dying, which I'll talk about in a minute. Because it's generally bad to drop gladiators that don't have a high chance of winning ever. But this would make having a weaker, worse gladiator potentially still useful if it just had a chance when you landed a hit of killing the opponent then and there. That would make for a compelling expertise point, especially if it was still like maxed at 5. So like maximum 5% chance, nat 20 on a d20 to just outright kill the opponent. Or the system could be even more complex than just a flat roll, but the idea just being like if it did something to potentially give you an RNG chance of turning the tides of an otherwise completely and totally hopeless battle, that would be so much more interesting than progress through the game faster, finish beating the game faster, start another run sooner. And again, giving no actual combat effect means it would actually be harder to win, theoretically, which would actually make it worse. Like, it would hinder your ability to proceed more quickly, would increase the chance of you losing the gladiator you spent those points on. So, like, these three, terrible, interesting, pretty bad. Now, the weapon training. So, by default, as I showed yesterday, the gladiators each start with one specialization. If you give them that type of weapon, they get the full damage bonus, which effectively is 1 point of strength per damage. And if you give them anything else, they get half. So, by giving them an additional weapon that they're specialized in, it opens up the available weapons for you to equip them with. But if you get lucky with the shop, if you get lucky with the market, and you just keep getting the weapons you need for the gladiators you're dropping, or if you have a variety of gladiators, so you always have somebody who can use the best weapons in the shop, using expertise to increase the versatility of a fighter is negligible at worst. And at best, if you just have, for example, a whole lot of really high tier Lancias sitting around, putting one or two, specializations of Lancia on a couple of fighters can be, beneficial until you burn through those Lancias, and then you just kind of have to hope the market has either the Gladius or the Lancia. Otherwise, you end up in the exact same position you were when you just had the one specialization. Just throwing one out, like, I would personally feel like the expertise point was better spent and accomplished the goal from what I, recognize more effectively if it, instead of giving you one specific other weapon you're equally good with, if it maybe was like versatility training or something where it increased the percentage you get from a weapon you're not specialized in. So perhaps have a 5-point max where if you put 5 points into making the gladiator as versatile as possible, you could literally give them any weapon and have no problem and get full benefit. But if you just put 2 points in, then you would be increasing the damage they get from a weapon they're not specialized in by 70% instead of 50%. Or not increase, but get 70% instead of 50%. So for 2 expertise points, you could effectively give an extra half of the damage that you otherwise would have gotten from a non-specialist weapon. It just, like, this concept has a lot of room for expansion and growth and depth that I think would be pretty cool if they, did in the remake. The special talents. And I'm doing the special talents before I do the rest because these are... It's a completely different beast than the rest of that. And this is all pretty generic stuff that I'll probably burn through pretty quickly. But the talents are, just to go over them quickly before I talk about them. Second Wind, you recharge all stamina immediately upon running out. So, when your gladiator would normally, without this perk, start huffing and puffing and trying to recover because they're tired and getting stabbed and being unable to dodge or block because they're fatigued, and then I think you spend like 1 round fatigued and then you regenerate a percentage of your stamina, and then you get fatigued again and repeat and you yo-yo between sitting there huffing and puffing and getting stabbed or being able to fight effectively. This lets you burn through your entire stamina reserve twice. So the 10 talent points gives you double stamina. So if you already have max stamina of 150, then this effectively doubles it to 300. So the more stamina you have, the stronger it is. Out of the gate, the fighter scores a guaranteed hit during the first turn. So, when you drop your gladiator in, regardless of whether they have a 2% hit chance or a 75% hit chance, which is the max when you have 150 dexterity, the first swing will hit. Period. So, this is best used on the lower dexterity characters. You get less effectiveness whenever you already have a 75% hit chance. However, if you're going full glass cannon, it actually can be beneficial to get that guaranteed hit to then potentially kill faster because there is still a 25% chance that your first swing would normally miss. Quick reflexes is the exact opposite. The first hit is guaranteed to be dodged. So it's worth noting this is the first hit and not the first swing. So you can actually survive pretty long against somebody who doesn't have a, massive hit chance with just this. And then last breath is like stamina, but for health. Whenever you would die or get close to dying, you regenerate a percentage of your health once. Obviously, more effective the higher your health is. Less effective the lower your health is. Now, the trick of it is every single one of these requires 10 points of the 29 your gladiator will get over the course of their entire career. And while you're saving up those 10 points, you're not getting any other combat effectiveness. Which means there's a good chance you'll have saved up 8 or 9 points, and if you're dropping them in actual fights, they can die, because you didn't have the 8 or 9 points worth of other stuff to keep them alive. So it's very much like these are like end cap things. If you have a project gladiator and you are willing to just let them passively train for half the game, then you can safely get one of these before having to drop them in a fight. But that's pretty impractical most of the time. So you're trading effectiveness for 10 levels worth of fights to get a one-shot thing. Now, again, if you keep your defensive gladiator's dexterity at 60, and you only have a 30% hit chance, that guaranteed hit, once you get it, can very much help the gladiator win fights where they otherwise probably would have lost. Just like the quick reflexes can save a glass cannon gladiator when they otherwise would have died. So they're not bad. It's just, it takes a massive investment to commit to one, and you're giving up on combat effectiveness that could help them win the fights that they're dropping in until they get it. But altogether, still, this is some of the depth of building a character. Do you go for one of the talents? Do you do it immediately? Do you start off a project knight, or not project knight, a project gladiator, and the first 10 levels he gains, set them aside to drop onto one of these? It's interesting. It creates an interesting decision space that is good. Honestly, I feel like having like a progress where like you start off with a 10% chance for it to trigger, and then, you know, each additional point is 10% more chance, would probably be more compelling. Especially since that would also give you the option to just dip into it if you just want the small chance of something happening, like a guaranteed hit. But as currently implemented in this particular game, I look forward to seeing what the remake does with it, but as currently implemented, it is a big risk-reward, high risk, high reward. If you survive the 10 levels worth of fights, and then you drop a point in it, it's big payout. Can potentially just swing the fight completely in your favor. Moving on, armor training. For 1 point, you get the access to the next level of armor. The levels of armor are hide, leather, studded, mail, plate. Hide is between 5 and 19, or not 19, 5 and 9%. Leather is 10 to 19. Studded is 20 to 29. Mail is 30 to 39. And plate is 40 to 49. Now, there's also staff, which you see here. I have 2 smiths, and that increases the armor bonus by 15.6%. So I can go over to this armor that I bought, which was 9% in the shop, so best hide possible. But it's actually giving 10% damage mitigation because of my smiths. So if you have smiths that are leveled up quite high and giving you massive bonuses, you can actually get over half your damage reduced, or over 50% damage reduction, pretty significantly, for 5 points of expertise. And the whole time you're building it up, you're gaining 10%, 20%, 30%. So like, it's very effective for increasing your effective health. And it's also very straightforward. So pretty decent little, concept of unlock the ability to use armor. So the thing that makes this more deep than just giving 10% damage reduction per point is that that's only assuming you can find and afford the highest quality armor of that type. And as you drop into fight after fight after fight, that armor gets damaged and loses defense, and it results in you eventually needing to replace it. And if there's not high tier armor in the shop to replace it, you have gladiators dropping in damaged armor. And so it opens up options to use damage reduction that may or may not be available. Pretty interesting. Probably, I would argue the armor training is one of the most compelling choices on the entire expertise list. Just because there's so many factors to it. Because once again, complexity, if well implemented, can actually breed a lot of depth in a game. Whereas if it was just all hide armor was 10% damage reduction ever, then that would be a lot less depth than this entire hide that you buy has different ratings, and then it gets damaged and has to be replaced. Like that complexity adds a lot of depth. And it's very, very intuitive, very easy to follow, and very interesting to use. Now then, we'll go on to deftness and quickness, which are both stamina effect. So deftness makes each attack your gladiator makes cost less stamina, which means you can make more attacks before your gladiator stands there huffing and puffing getting stabbed. Very straightforward, limited effectiveness, not much depth. Quickness. When you dodge or block, it makes your opponent's attack cost more stamina. This is very similar to deftness because the delta of stamina, the frequency with which your gladiator versus the opposing gladiator becomes fatigued, sits there huffing and puffing and getting stabbed, is still affected. However, While deafness is just guaranteed every single attack costs less stamina. Very boring, very straight, very just generic and simple. Quickness adds in that one extra layer of complexity of you have to dodge or block your opponent's attack to reduce their stamina and make them sit there huffing and puffing sooner. Which, obviously, on a glass cannon gladiator that primarily is just there to hit as fast and hard as possible and get the kill before they take much damage, not interesting at all. But on a defensive gladiator, it's a very interesting consideration. So, cool. I like it. Honestly, quickness is probably the most compelling of the non-talent choices you can make for expertise. Like, where is the break point where you feel like that extra stamina cost based on your percentage chance to dodge and slash or block? What is the cutoff where you go, yes, that's valuable now? And I feel like different players would answer that question differently, which is always a good benchmark to kind of see like how compelling is this choice? Because like Flare, I would venture to say that the majority of players who understand the game's systems think Flare is useless, or at the very least misplaced. Like the points put into Flare would be misplaced, except for like very specific niches, like you have a gladiator you specifically are just throwing to the wolves for some reason. I don't know. I would be surprised if very many people thought Flare was good, ever. Whereas quickness, some people would probably think it's good given the right situation, given the right settings. And that point of this is enough dodge and block chance for this to be good, I feel like would be different for almost every player. So, that's a very interesting expertise option. Toughness. Flat damage reduction. It's 3 damage reduction per point of toughness. So, it counteracts exactly 3 strength. Unless you also have armor training. I'm fairly sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly sure the percent damage reduction from the armor training happens before the flat damage reduction from the toughness. So if you have no armor, every point of toughness is 3 damage reduction, which counteracts your opponent's strength by 3. If you have armor training, and you've got 5 points of armor training, and you're dropping some plate on your gladiator that gives 50% damage reduction, all of a sudden that 3 damage per point of toughness turns into 6, effectively, because the damage is reduced by half, so it doubles the effectiveness of the toughness. And synergistic expertise point expenditure is depth that is lacking in most other places. Crit chance and crit damage also have that sort of bond, so armor training and toughness each make the other a more compelling choice. Other than that, very straightforward. It directly counteracts your opponent's strength, reduces the damage you take, can be the difference between a hit killing you and surviving with 3 hit points. Then, finally, last but not least, crit chance. The reason crit chance shows up in so many different games and so many types of games, like even in a first-person shooter, most first-person shooters have either bonus damage or guaranteed kills when you shoot somebody in the head. That's because having that smaller chance, that more infrequent event that can come in and change the tide of a fight is compelling in and of itself. So, this game, by default, by base, every gladiator has a 5% crit chance to do 1.25 times damage. That's pretty minimal, since most games have much higher damage payoff for crit or, whatever. But it's the default D20, 5% is rolling a nat 20 on a D20. So it's a very standard starting point for crit chance in a lot of games. But you have 15 points you can put into crit chance. And each point increases by 4%, I believe. So it's up to a total 75% max, if I remember correctly. And the points of crit damage increase from 1.25 to 1.5 to 2, I think. Actually, let's just see. 1.5 to 1.75 to 2. Yeah. So it almost doubles the effectiveness of a critical hit. But if you don't ever put any points into crit chance, you still have that base 5%. And it's 2 points per. Okay. So it's a maximum of 35% crit chance. And obviously, in order to crit, you have to hit. So on a character that has a very low hit chance, which actually I think Nerva has a good hit chance. Well, for a level 6 gladiator, 60 is good dexterity. But after having put that many points into crit, I would obviously want to max out his dexterity as fast as possible, because you can't crit if you don't hit. So, crit chance, having a presence in a game, always adds a little bit of depth. And some crit chances, like some crits in games, are incredibly complex. Some are very simple. But there's not really much else to say other than, yeah, it's crit chance. There's a reason it's in so many games. It makes fights more compelling. It gives you the chance to win as the underdog. That's how it is. So, that's all the expertise points. The builds basically boil down to, do you want to have like a generalist that's a little bit okay at everything? Do you want to have a tank that has really high agility and reflexes and health and, like toughness and armor training and quickness? Or do you want to have a glass cannon that's like dexterity, stamina, strength, and all the crit in the world? Those are basically the three major build paths, and yeah, it's whatever. It's building characters is the majority of the depth of this game. And I say that, wait, there was something else I was supposed to talk about. What was I supposed to talk about? Right. Knocking out opponents. Right. So yes, off to the bosses next. The boss system, the other stables that you're fighting against, adds more complexity and depth than just having a randomly generated gladiator you're against every week or every battle. Because it does give you the ability to look through their list, see how capable their gladiators are at present, and make estimates on what they will drop. Now, unfortunately, this game, I don't know how the AI is programmed and how they choose their gladiators, but if we go to the calendar here, this strong fight, which is the second highest hype, it goes strong massive, does not necessarily mean that this boss will drop one of his top 3 gladiators. There's a chance he'll drop one of his lower rated gladiators. That's not so much of a problem. The problem is when there's a very low hype fight and they decide to drop their best gladiator. It makes it so that even the opponent you're against is so heavily RNG that it negates a lot of the strategy and depth this game could have. And it's the thing, honestly, I hope that the remake has paid the most attention to. Because this idea, in a vacuum, just looking at the potential opponents you could fight, having maybe even personalities of the different characters, etc., etc. There's a lot of complexity that could be added to add additional depth, but just at its base value. Here's this person that you can choose to go against. Here is the list of opponents. Here is the intensity of the fight. Thus, it's going to skew the RNG towards one direction or the other, to the top, to the middle, or to the bottom of this list. And then you have to make an estimate of which character they'll drop and choose a fighter appropriately. Now, that adds some depth. Having more information, having ways to narrow down exactly or closer to who you will exactly be facing will increase the depth up to the point where you just know exactly who your opponent that you're going to be fighting is, which gladiator they're presenting to fight, and then you just make the most optimal choice, at which point it becomes more puzzly and less strategy, which is an important differentiation. Whenever you have a game that is a game of strategy, the more perfect your information, the less strategy it takes to play. So if in chess, for example, just the oldest game of strategy the oldest European game of strategy, whatever, chess, it's a staple of strategy. If you knew every single turn, if you knew for the next turn which piece your opponent would play, like which piece on their board was going to be moved, it would significantly reduce the immediate strategy of the game. The overarching strategy of the entire course of play would not be likely affected too much, but it would definitely reduce the strategy of that next turn. If you know they're going to move that particular knight, and you can make a move based on that, it reduces the strategy inherent, the decision making for that particular turn. So, that is a consideration when you're making a strategic or management game with how much information to give the player. That being said, the less perfect the information is, the less you know what's going to happen, like with the recruitment. That's interesting that you have to invest points, which I'll talk about leveling up staff in a minute, but you have to invest points into getting better and better representations of the gladiators you're hiring. That's interesting. And I feel like that actually makes the hiring gladiator system more complex and deeper and more compelling and just much more interesting than just, here is all the stats, here's their cost, at which point it's literally just punching in figures into a calculator to determine the optimal purchase. But since there's so much RNG, which actually, here, Fronto, Akrasim, and Barba are his three best. Is he going to drop one of them? No, I don't want to do that. I just want to skip. Yep, okay. So, what were they? Brain, hold on to information for just a second. Fronto, Akrasim, Barba. Fronto, Akrasim, Barba. Fronto, Akrasim, Barba. Yeah, he's dropping Barba. Okay, so this time it panned out. Skip. And, hey, she didn't die. 20% chance. Heck yeah. But yeah, so the fact that there is some weight to the randomness, like weighted randoms allow you to benefit from the obscurity of not knowing without the, frustration of, I'm going into the easiest type of battle, the lowest rated type of battle. I'm going to drop a low rated, low level gladiator. Oh man, they dropped their best. What? That's just not fair. But yeah, weighted randoms are wonderful. And a lot of the times that's what allows me, that's why I have played, and I didn't actually look at the gladiator I was dropping, so I'm not going to count that. But I've won 23 fights, I think it said. Yeah, I've won 23 fights, and I only lost one. And it resulted in Brocus dying. Because, yeah, everyone else has a record of whatever and 0. So, one time, RNG resulted in Brocus dying. Could I have trained him before dropping him? Yes, because he was level 2 or 3 at the time. And I wasn't leveling anyone up, just to show you stuff about leveling. Which, honestly, in hindsight, I could have just had one character ready to level, and it would have been PG. But that aside, so this entire system, I really hope that they kept it and maybe expanded on it a little bit, because this is, in my opinion, the biggest opportunity for a game of this sort, this type of management game, to really thrive, is by making the interaction between yourself and the other stables as compelling as possible. So, that's that. That's literally all there is to that. RNG or AI or whatever you want to call it picks a gladiator for each battle, slightly influenced by how major the battle is. So low, strong, mild, average, etc. But yeah, so that's that. And then staff, as I was saying with the recruiting. Your staff levels up as you play. You can see KPO here is level 4. So I can either choose to increase his evaluation so that future gladiator markets he will be more accurate on his assessment, or on his network, which increases the number of gladiators he offers. And since I already have a pretty large stable that I'm quite happy with, obviously I would put those points into evaluation to be more accurate when hiring replacement gladiators. Training versus coaching, like all of these, the fact that you can only level up one or the other is interesting, and it adds a small amount of depth to the overarching management part of the game, which is really the focus of this game. And it should be, because if you want to go into gladiatorial combat and play as the gladiators, there's actually quite a few games where you can, like, not necessarily where that's the main focus, but where you can go and enjoy that particular experience until you get sick of it, and then there's other parts of the games. Like, I think Skyrim has some kind of gladiator. I mean, technically some missions in Elder Scrolls games are go fight this person one-on-one. So that sort of, experience is available in a lot of other venues. But this management, looking over, keeping the company in the profits, making money, not going bankrupt, that's what the focus of the game is, as it should be. Just the systems at play to help you do that can be more deep and compelling to prevent it from just being a side monitor or, chill game. Now, that being said, there's nothing wrong with a game intentionally being a side monitor / chill game. Although if they were going for that complete aesthetic and that complete experience, I would definitely make the fights last longer and just make it so that there's more that can happen on the side screen while you're doing other stuff. Make it more interesting in various ways to just extend how long you can go between interact with it, do other stuff, interact with it. Because the best part about having it as a side monitor game is glancing over while you're doing other stuff and seeing the fight getting close towards the end and being like, oh man, it's down to the last hit or two on each side, who's gonna win? And then watching it for like 15 seconds as the last hit lands. That's the most enjoyable part of the whole just chill and watch gladiators fight aspect of the game. And then the fact that you could choose, back to this, the tangent aside, the fact that you can choose, for example, to be a doctor. So we know that our gladiators are immune to sickness, which means this is a no-brainer. Just level up the injury and reduce the amount of injuries they suffer, which synergizes with our already reduced injury time from being a doctor. So, yeah, good times. So we went over leveling up gladiators, we went over gladiator stats, we went over leveling up staff. Recruitment we went over yesterday, and the market is very straightforward. Price, effect, type, buy stuff, give it to gladiators, they do better. And then loans are very much straightforward. You take out a loan, you pay interest, you pay a certain amount per day, and you can pay it off at any point, blah, 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 blah. Very much standard, very important for any game that is all about just managing your finances to not go bankrupt and succeed in a business. Any management game should have some form of, oh man, you got unlucky a lot lately. Yeah, here's a option, a option that carries some penalty that you can choose to try to save the run. That's what this is. It's very, very good. Especially since there's only like one loan available at any given time. You can have multiple loans out, but only one's presented at a time. So are you going to take this one, or are you going to wait until the market refreshes and you get maybe a lower interest rate or a higher amount? So, yeah. If you take a loan out, the next loan that pops might be better in whatever way. So, yeah. Sponsorship, you just pay money to have more fights per month. Mostly a thing you do once you're getting closer to leaving the location, going on to the next. Or if you have a very solid gladiator roster and you're just ready to go fight after fight after fight for a little while. Good stuff. And that's about it. That's an in-depth look at everything that actually lends any kind of depth to this game. And altogether, it doesn't add enough to offset just the pure RNG of set up your gladiators as best you can, glance at your opponent's gladiators a couple times to get a feel for what your gladiators can handle, and then choose opponents based on... Also, actually, worth noting, so right now, the attendance is whatever, and the purse is whatever. This does not change. So if I fight him, and I send my best, the pot does not change. The amount of money I will make off of the fight does not change. The amount I can bet does not change. So I would... Whoops, I did not mean to confirm that. I would be able to bet the same amount regardless, but the odds of winning change based on who is against who. So the fact that I sent my best against Lupus here instead of one of my lower rated gladiators reduces the payoff I can get from the bet. Whereas if I had sent a lower rated gladiator and maybe had 1 to 2 odds instead of 2 to 1, I could get a much more lucrative payoff if they win, but because of the rating, they would be allegedly less likely to win. However, I found that if you go just like straight out glass cannon full crit build, and you have absolutely abysmal like agility, reflexes, health, you can drop them into fights that other gladiators of comparable stat point distribution would lose, but because you hyper focused into hitting fast, hitting hard, and getting crits, you can kill opponents that you have like a 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5 chance of winning against, allegedly. So the whole betting system, the whole combat system, like there's so many places that the game could be modified in so many ways that would change it in so many directions that I've waited to do an A-modest analysis on it for a while, because at that point I'd just be spitballing. If I just did an A-modest analysis on this game, I would just be spitballing a whole bunch of different changes that could be made, all just out of the blue, and talking about different directions. It would basically be just an A-modest analysis about any kind of management game where you have some aspect of the game that you drop into something that's determined by RNG to find success or failure. So, yeah, I decided to wait instead. And, the combat stance thing I would love to see expanded on more than just 25% more, 25% less damage on both sides. But, So, with Nerva here fighting Lupus, I will go ahead and end the episode. This is all I have to say about Age of Gladiators, period. When the remake comes out, I will likely do at least one video. That one video will be when it releases. I will say, hey, it's out now. This is my first impressions of it. And I'm really, really hoping that it's well beyond just a new coat of paint on the same exact systems. I've already, during this hour, I've already been talking for almost an hour. Over this hour, I've mentioned several ways that the game could be improved in a variety of directions, and if all they did was took the exact same system and just gave it a new UI, I will be a little bit sad and quite indignant, actually. And that's why I refuse. If anyone wants to sponsor, even if it's just by sending me a key, I refuse to mince words. I refuse to be nice. I'm not going to complain if they send me a key, as long as they don't expect me to sign off on any kind of agreement of any kind. And moving forward, assuming you made it to the end of this video, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say you're probably here watching my channel, because I talk about things that interest you. Yeah, I'm definitely going to say it many times and moving into the future too, but I will never accept any kind of sponsorship of any kind that prevents me from saying, nah, F these guys, this is a pile, like, this is not something you should buy. Because I'm never going to really give reviews on games, but I will absolutely caution against a flat asset flip or, complete and total cash grab every time. Because those are the types of games being released that flood the market and make things harder for, legitimate games to gain visibility. So it is a personal affront to me. Now, with that out of the way, and having said everything I needed to say about this particular game to better address the remake and approach the A Modest analysis of it and the remake and games in that direction, I'm going to call it for the day. So, that's been Age of Gladiators. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one.